Retro and Modern Gaming Chat with Trev and Stu. How's it going, Stu?
It's going very well, thank you, Trev. Yeah, really good, really good.
Back in the game now, aren't we? We're banging out.
We're smashing them out. Smashing them out.
We had a little gap of a couple of weeks, well, more than a couple of weeks. Where we
it's about over a month and a half. Yeah,
it's bad, isn't it? Can't be a professional YouTuber. Well, we're not professional YouTubers, so we don't need to worry about being professional, do we?
No.
Not that we'd be able to really attempt that with our low quality, using iPhone headphones. Actually, you've got a nice set of headphones there with a mic on.
I know, yeah.
Well, you see it, but what are they? Turtle Beach or something?
Turtle Beach jobby, so they're designed for gaming, but...
do you actually use them for gaming? You don't play online, do you? Why'd you buy them?
Sort of PC gaming. I don't really do any PC gaming. So they do the job, hopefully. They're not the best setup in the world, but...
You did play Call of Duty. Didn't you say you got back into that for a bit, Call of Duty?
I did. I've been playing, Call of Duty.
The most generic multiplayer game you could possibly say you play.
I like to keep it sort of as generic as I can.
Yeah. Ghost was alright, I quite like that one. The campaign, I quite like the campaign.
The campaign was good, yeah.
Was that the one everyone hated? It was, wasn't it? Yeah.
No, I think it was Advanced Warfare or something. Well, no, the Infinite Warfare, the one in space.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one that everyone bought just to get the Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare.
People just bought them by default, really, don't they?
Exactly.
They don't really think about it. Anyway, yeah. Cool. So we've managed to get another guest on for this episode. So we are actually big fans of plugging old consoles into modern TVs, aren't we, Stu? Well, you've got
I'm more a fan of plugging old consoles into old TVs.
Which is the way to do it, isn't it?
That's the way to do it. Having a great big 50-inch 4K jobby and trying to plug all these things in with expensive cables.
£40 Amazon HDMI upscaler,
Yeah, that's. I've not really gone down that route. Yeah, I've always went no. You've got to have an old CRT, plug it all in. That's the way to do it. But
that's what we keep being told, isn't it? Yeah.
But it looks like anyway. We'll go on to our guests rather than me.
We love hearing about our setups. We had an episode. We actually had a show where we dedicated how we set up our consoles onto modern TVs and old TVs if we're like Stu. But the guy we've got on today, basically his entire YouTube channel revolves around, or a big chunk of it revolves around, getting your old consoles working in modern setups or even on CRTs, and even where you can buy sort of old CRTs. What are the best ones, like PVMs and things like that? We're big fans of his show. It's Bob from RetroRGB. Hey, Bob, thanks for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. We really, really appreciate you having you on. So you've probably heard, obviously, we like plugging in old consoles into modern TVs. So obviously that's what your channel kind of revolves around. So, I mean, how did you actually get into making a YouTube channel about this stuff? Is it, do you work with old equipment, so that's a natural thing for you, or is it just a hobby? How did you get started?
Well, how I started making YouTube videos was just simply because I had a website for years, and peers in the gaming industry were treating me nice, but I wasn't like, I would walk into an expo and try to talk to somebody who was in charge about doing a panel, and they'd basically be like, "Who the fuck are you?" Sorry, am I allowed to swear on this one?
Oh, fuck
yeah, swear away.
Good. I have a foul mouth, so I apologize to anybody else. But so I just kind of realized I can't continue to do my website without some kind of social media presence. I saw other people out there with, very mediocre videos getting 100,000 views. And while the website certainly got substantially more than that, I was getting no recognition. And recognition from gamers, I don't need. I'm just very happy to help. But, recognition from things like expos and other publications and journalists and stuff like that, it was getting really annoying when I was getting treated like a YouTuber with no followers, when technically I was, but I had a site with millions of views. So I was like, I guess I better suck it up and then just start doing a podcast and social media and stuff like that. I really tried to avoid it for a while, but because I knew it was just a rat hole of, how expensive the equipment is how good the videos are going to look. So it's like, I don't have all that. But yeah, how the website itself got started was, I've always been into these consoles, and the moment I found different ways to play them, I would always need to try it out. So my first website was in the 90s when I was like 13 years old about emulators.
Oh, cool.
And eventually when the Wii Virtual Console came out, I found a controller adapter that allows you to play original controllers on the Wii. And the controller adapter sucked. You know, there was a couple frames of lag just in that. And the virtual console games were okay. They weren't the best, but they were certainly okay. And that kind of spawned me looking into, well, what if I just go back and get all the other consoles? And maybe I'll just get a consumer grade CRT. And then I remembered as a kid, RGB. But as a kid in the 90s in the US, that was unfathomably expensive. You need converters or monitors or stuff like that. So I kind of went down that rat hole and all of a sudden realized there is no information out there on any of this stuff. There's a bunch of forum posts, and at the time, most of them, the majority were wrong. It was bad info, and you'd have to know which to go. So I started a Google Doc that I figured a few of my friends might like. And then my cousin Scott, who had been helping me out with all this, goes, "Why don't you just make it into a website?" And oh yeah, I guess I could just do that, huh? So.
Oh, you actually have a cousin Scott? I thought that was just some guy that was just called Cousin Scott.
No, that's become kind of an inner joke on it now because a lot of my friends refer to him as Cousin Scott. But he is my cousin. We've known each other obviously since we were very little kids, and you know, some of these things that we talk about, we experienced the first time at like 10 years old together. So it's kind of neat. He's got a very busy job and a family and everything. So while he still helps tremendously behind the scenes, he's not in front of the camera as much as he was when I first started out.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of for me and Chelsea as people that play retro games. Your channel is great because obviously we're not necessarily technically minded and we don't understand. I didn't really know about things like, like plugging in my console into HDTV, I get lagged then apparently, and knowing to put my TV into like game mode and things like that. Mm-hmm. And the good thing is you don't as well dismiss people that are like, you know what, I've got a NES. I just want to plug it into my 4K 100-inch TV.
No, and in fact, it's quite the opposite. The first 6 months of the site, before it was even really live, the only thing I cared about was squeezing every ounce of quality out of the consoles. And while I still very much go down that road and always love keeping up with that, I very quickly started to get emails from people, and I realized that it's not... The end goal for everybody should be what's the best experience for your setup. So for the majority of people, you know, the difference between like, let's just say S-Video and RGB, you know, 2X versus 5X on a flat screen is, I mean, that's not going to make the slightest bit of difference in their experience. What will is a ton of lag, progressive scan being processed like interlaced, so everything's flickery and juddery and gives you a headache when you play it. So I care very much about making sure everybody gets the best experience, and that's what the panel I've been doing around the U.S. this year is kind of focused around. And I'll eventually make that into a fancy video. I just wanted to do it live first because every time I do it, I get questions afterwards that I realize should have been in the presentation. So that's kind of the focus of this panel, is just teaching people, you know, while the info is out there and while it certainly is fun to try to squeeze the best out of your console, the very basics are, if you have a CRT available, just plug anything into it, RF, composite, doesn't matter, and you get a perfectly great experience on the classic consoles, no lag added. And if you're gaming on a flat screen, just try to get any solution that doesn't add lag and doesn't process the image wrong. And at the moment, there's really two main things for that: the OSSC and the RetroTink 2X. But there's something coming next month that's pretty exciting for beginners. Which,
really?
Yeah, I was just working on the video for that right when I realized it was about time to shoot this podcast. So hopefully, I think I'm going to be the one breaking the news on it, and hopefully that'll be out next month. That's cool. Pretty interesting. That's going to be a game changer, in my opinion.
Yeah, because the OSSC, I can't pronounce it. That's basically at the top of my list of things to get, because one thing that was a bit of a rude awakening for me was my girlfriend bought me a 4K TV to replace my sort of 1080 one, which ended up being going into another room. We have another room where we've got an Xbox, so I thought, well, we'll use it in there. But this 4K TV just didn't have a SCART input. And I had all of these consoles that I've got with RGB SCART. And I was like, I can't even use them.
You didn't read the specs before you bought it.
No, it wasn't me that bought it. So My girlfriend isn't going to know the minutiae of plugging, old consoles into a modern TV, so I can't really blame her for that.
That might not have mattered anyway, though, because if you plug consoles directly into flat screens, you're still feeding it the 240p signal. So two very common things to happen is that it adds more lag than other signals, or it's just processed as 480i, because most TVs don't know what 240p is. And it's more common with composite video than with RGB or component video. So over here, if you take like the HD RetroVision cables, plug them into a component input on a TV, that is a very good chance that'll be processed correctly. On that same TV, if you feed it composite video, very often it'll process that as a TV signal, and now you'll have 6 frames of lag instead of 2 or something like that. So you were kind of stuck getting a scaler anyway these days.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about it is, I got a awful like Amazon upscaler, the cheap £40. Well, I don't know, that's probably $40 for you, and that's what I'm surviving on at the moment. It does the job. I obviously put it in game mode, and I've minimised the lag that I'm
Are you talking about that SCART to HDMI adapter?
Yeah, that classic.
I hate that thing so much. I'm actually having a video on that soon. And it's the funny thing is there are so many really genuinely good uses for that thing. The only thing it's not good at is just playing your games. And unfortunately, there's a bunch of shillers out there that like to hold that up to a camera and tell everybody they need to buy it. Drives me crazy, because those people don't then get the emails that I get from the people. I'm a single parent, I Googled this and this video came up, and all I wanted to do was escape every now and then and play an old game, and this sucks, and what do I do? And I get a lot of those emails where it's like, oh, I'm sorry, you just you threw that money in the garbage, so let me try to make this better with you. But
they won't naturally. I guess that they're the only really old devices, perhaps, that people really want to plug into modern TVs. Well, I guess you've got like VHS. Well, actually, there are DVD and VHS combo players that I think there might even be some that have HDMI. So you're probably okay with VHS tapes, and then maybe laser discs might be the only other thing. I've got a laser disc player, but then I use that on my 1080p TV, so that will just go in the SCART on that, and it's not something it's not a game I'm playing, so it can be laggy as whatever it wants to be, but it won't really make a difference.
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah. So it's the only real device that's old that would have these issues are these old games consoles, and I think it is in my. I need to get some kind of proper upscaler, and I think the OSSC will be the one that I'll go for, unless this new one. Also, I will watch your video when you reveal it.
No, the OSSC for the foreseeable future is going to be the best that you can get. I think there might be add-ons for that coming, but just buying an OSSC, as far as I know, I'm looped in pretty tightly with a lot of what's going on, but not 100% of it. So as far as I know, in the foreseeable future, the OSSC is still going to be the thing to get.
Yeah.
Bob, do you think there's a scope for, I don't know, if one of the TV manufacturers actually got the OSSC and actually sort of built it in, and would there be a sort of commercial argument for, I'm going to get that Samsung
retro game TV? Yeah, that'd be cool.
I don't think so, because of what goes into making the OSSC work. It could never just, it technically is a plug and play device, but if you really want to dial in good settings and get the best out of it, any kind of scenario like that, you'd really need to build a dedicated scaler. But what I really hope at some point, any kind of TV manufacturer would take game mode a little bit more seriously. LG and TCL, 2 brands in the US, certainly have. Samsung to a little bit. But I also think any kind of TV with an integer scaler solution, if you turn on game mode, then you could select whether, maybe game mode defaults to integer or something like that, and then you could choose whatever else you want. I think that would be better, because then you could take any signal, retro or new, and scale it however you'd like without having to worry about those weird little, things that are only involved in retro consoles. So, yeah, I'd certainly pay more for that.
There's obviously a lot of these cables coming out from Hyperkin, and where it's literally just a plug and play, go straight in the socket on the back of the console.
Yeah, total shit, total garbage.
And I've been thinking, like, people like you see YouTubers saying, "Oh, it's great. I don't have to have like," or Metal Jesus is kind of one, which is a funny one, where he's like, "I just want to have everything plugged into HDMI. So like, these cables are great." Although he's actually better now. He does do these slightly more in depth things where he's like, "Well, it's got a bit of noise on it, so I'm not going to use it anymore."
Metal Jesus is certainly an easy person to pick on simply because he's got so many followers. But the generalization that I liked, which he does fall into, but there's a bunch of people who, you know, it's kind of a weird thing, right? Because when a lot of these people have started out, you know, they do it as a hobby and they talk about their opinions on stuff. And now they're at the point where if they want to keep going, they have to try to do it for a living. And then, you know, that one idea a week that you could go for years, now you have to put out 3 or 4 videos a week in order to be a professional YouTuber. YouTube requires quantity, not quality. And then you have to make up stuff to talk about. So then you go outside of your level of expertise, forgetting that you have this huge following. And I think that's really irresponsible. And for some of the people out there, you know, they don't seem to understand how any of this works. So they get a big following, then a company will fly them out to do a promo on that, and now they think that they're an expert. And it cracks me up because I've seen this stuff before in like the marketing side, where a company will just fly a famous person out, and all the nerds will be like, "Oh, they're such an idiot. Why are you doing that?" And the marketing team is like, "It doesn't matter. They got, you know, 200,000 followers that'll buy anything they say. I don't care what they, you know, they could call it the flux capacitor for all I care. People will still buy it." And it's unbelievably egotistical and irresponsible that people go down that road and start giving recommendations for shit that they have no idea what they're talking about. So, I mean, I made a couple of mistakes over the years in reviews and told people to buy a few things that turned out to not be what I thought. And they're very low quantity, very niche things. And I felt awful about that. Like a few people that emailed me, I'd searched my email for it and emailed them back like, "Hey, I was wrong." Like, I couldn't even imagine what it would take to have a couple 100,000 followers and just not give a fuck about saying, "Oh yeah, just go buy that for $40. This is great. This is, you know, look, makes your consoles look perfect. Click on my affiliate link and try one yourself." Like, I couldn't sleep at night doing that.
Yeah, it's funny because talking about like YouTubers were talking about something that, you know, people are relying on them to kind of, they see them as the experts. Actually, like, I don't want to sort of shit on like Metal Jesus too much. I do like him and he's a cool dude. But I watched like the PlayStation Vita episode that he did a while ago, and there was they had a whole bit about only in Japan you could get all the different colors with the Slim. But the trouble is you can't really, if you're buying this region free, but the PlayStation Network part of it isn't region free. And I was just like, it is. You just log in with your PSN ID and it will just open that store for the region you're in. They don't get locked down. But you would know that if you just turned it on and logged in. It's not even like a big thing. And looking at the comments, people straight away were like, "No, that's not true. You just log in with your own PSN and it'll work like as if you bought it from that region." And everyone was like, "I don't know why they haven't tried that." And I think it was Kelsey was on it, who I would think would be pretty, you know, knowledgeable about that stuff. So kind of a weird one. But yeah, I mean, people will probably like, you know, take that as gospel, you know.
But if you have to put out 3 videos a week to pay your rent and to pay your affiliates and the people that work with you, you can't really go back, you know, and pay too much attention to all that. So I sympathize very much. I've certainly given myself cutoffs before where I'm 40 hours into a video that is not, you know, you check your YouTube revenue and I'll make $110 off of it or something. And it's like, I can't spend another minute on this. I'll leave, you know, I'll leave mistakes in that really don't matter. One that still bugs me is, it was the Hyperkin HDMI NES or SNES. And I said something about the way it processes the video. And what I said turned out to be completely wrong, but everything else about the conclusion was correct. So I left it in and it still bugs me. Bottom line is don't ever buy that giant piece of crap. But so.
I think a lot of people with those pound ones, the Hyperkin and the pound ones, they're all, I have watched reviews and people have said, well, they're almost, if you've got, you know, $30 or whatever they cost, and they do connect your old machines to your modern TVs. That's what they do, and they don't claim to be the $150, $200 solution that other things are. So I think there's a sort of a difference between the market of someone who wants to sort of reminisce and, you know, puts in an old game and just wants to have it on their TV with the right, with a lead that'll show the picture. And then rather than, oh, actually, I want to get it as good as it possibly can be with no lag with this. So personally, I think there is a place for them, but they're not very good.
So everything you just said is correct, but here's the problem I have with that. You have a company like Pound. I use them as an example because I know something about them that'll come out eventually. But you have a company like Pound that sees a hole in the market and sees exactly what you just said. There's a bunch of people that just want to stick their games on. They probably just want to blast the nostalgia and really don't care. So they take advantage of that, and then they make something that probably costs, I don't know, let's say $10 to make, probably less, to be honest with you. And then they send them to these people, and they just bombard people with these things. They'll send them a box of 10, ask if they wouldn't mind doing a video on it. And then people plug it in. And if you're at a still screen, it actually looks fine. It looks, and to be honest, sometimes it looks really great. Like a turn-by-turn role-playing game type of thing. It would actually look fine. But they add almost 3 frames of lag. And your average good TV's got 2, but just your average standard TV, even in game mode, is 3 to 4.
You would really feel that, especially on Twitch or retro games. Yeah,
absolutely. And anytime there's any movement on the screen, you have that interlaced flicker that genuinely gives me a headache. I don't say that just to make a joke about it. So you have a company that knows that they're making shit because they want to take advantage of that hole in the market. So they sell it to all these people who make a profit off of it. And it sucks. And just for the record, a quick aside on this, I never ever shit on the people that sell these, because the bottom line is, whether it's a brick and mortar store or online, if you have a customer that wants the cheapest solution and you tell them those actually aren't that good, you should look at this, there's a good chance you'll just lose that customer forever.
Yeah.
So the better response is, we have the cheap one. It's really not that good. So maybe start out with it if you'd like and then come back. But, here's what we suggest. At least now you earn somebody's trust doing that. Yeah. So I don't shit on the people that sell it, but the people that just get a stack of them and show them, it stinks. And replacements for those or better options are coming very soon for all that stuff. And I hope it just puts Pound completely out of business. It's kind of disgusting the way they approached all this stuff, and especially the way they try to market it. Hyperkin's a different beast, and where they just they're just trying to fill space on game stores, and they don't really care. And a lot of the stuff that they rebrand is great. You don't very often hear the stories about a batch of really awesome controllers that came out for $20 that is just as good as the original with the long cable. Like, a company that sells 1,000 products, it's very easy to miss the 800 that are pretty cool when you have 100 that are so bad. It's embarrassing. So
yeah, I kind of feel like ultimately I hope we get to a place where, well, the video cable standards will keep changing. And like HDMI probably is around, it's been around for mainstream for over 10 years. But I kind of hope that ultimately every console that's, at least the popular ones, so, NES, Mega Drive, Sega Master System, Saturn, Dreamcast, PS1, they'll all have like a good, just single cable straight from the socket in the back to HDMI or, but I kind of feel like, obviously, we're getting that a little bit with some of the consoles, like the Pound cables, the terrible Pound cables. But I think we're in like the first generation of these, where the sort of, I guess, the crappy companies are making them at the moment. And then other companies will say, that's crap, we've got a better version, and hopefully they'll just keep like iterating. I hope that at some stage we'll have every console, there'll be a simple one-plug solution. And it might even... Do you foresee there's a time when maybe within 10 years, every console will have like a good quality single cable, and maybe it'll negate the need for the OSSCs and all that sort of thing?
I'd say way quicker than that, because remember that once something is digital, then you could use other scalers on it. So I would think if there's solutions that are direct 240p HDMI or 480p or 720, whatever, but if there's just a basic solution that does a good job with a digital capture, with a digital transfer, I think from that point on, everything else will take its place. So if you just theoretically, even if somebody invented just the perfect analog to HDMI cable that doesn't scale at all, and then you have an HDMI scaler then you'd be able to take those signals and do whatever you'd like with them. I think clone consoles are about 5 years away from getting way better, though. I think once projects like the Mister really start to get their cores, near perfect, which a lot of them are very close, people who are ASIC engineers will be able to make their own little system on a chip with those. And it's very easy for somebody like me to just say that sentence as if it's like, oh yeah, let me just open another beer. But the fact is, as more talented people get in this, more things will happen. I mean, a couple of years ago, if I ever mentioned like, oh, can you imagine if one dude is just going to reverse engineer the NES, SNES, and Genesis? You'd be like, yeah, fuck off. Easy to say. And then, here we have Kevin Horton did that himself. So I think there's going to be other people like him and like all of the really awesome people contributing to the Mister project. And I hope one of them is an ASIC engineer and just starts spinning these things off. And then theoretically, you would be able to get a $99 clone console or cheaper. If a place like Hyperkin picks something like that up, you would be able to get a $50 NES or SNES that plays perfectly fine in 720p with, as accurate as one could ask for.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a very realistic thing that might happen in the future. That I'd give it within 5 years, but I hope it's sooner than that.
Because I've seen in the last couple of years, I think you'll probably have a. Hopefully, maybe sort of agree with this, but I've seen huge sort of progress in the last couple of years. Things like sort of the Carby for the GameCube, things like the HDMI for the Dreamcast, even though it's not that great, and this HDMI for sort of the PS2 and things like that. It just seems like things are just coming on leaps and bounds, and the OSSC is constantly being updated. And of course, before that, you had the sort of FrameMeister, which may be sort of cost prohibitive. But for me, in the last sort of 2 years, I've seen sort of huge things that I've gone, oh wow! It was because to give you a bit of my background, for the last sort of 10 years, I've ran a video game shop in Croydon, which I gave up about a year ago for one reason or another, and it's but so people always used to come in and now they would buy Super Nintendos, NESs, and what originally came with it was an RF lead. So everyone would come back, oh, I can't get this to work on my TV. So then we used to give them Justine's just walked in the background, so
extra special guest.
Extra special guest, yeah. So what I'm trying to say is I think it's been sort of huge leaps and bounds from sort of back then to we used to give out sort of, composite leads or what we call AV leads.
Yeah, so I mean, would you have the people? Would you say to them though, like, just be aware that if you're using a modern TV, you'll need this, you'll need that? Did you actually tell them that? Yeah,
you'd almost have to pre-warn people when they're buying, say, for example, an N64. If you put this into 4K TV, it's not going to look quite as good as you used to have it. Try and get yourself a CRT out of the loft. Go to a charity shop and get yourself a CRT. That's how I'd recommend playing it. But still all right on your HDTV. But
yeah, because for me that's not good enough, because I know. I used to go into the arcade and there'd be this big Daytona USA arcade machine that was on a huge screen. I mean, it was probably like 30-inch or 40-inch in those days, which is now the size of a typical HDTV. And I used to then go home and play my Mega Drive or my Saturn version of Daytona USA, and I'm like, God, I would love to have this on a huge TV. Which they did. There was rear projection TVs, but there wasn't something you just casually buy. Certainly when you're not a kid playing these games. So now I see HDTVs as a way for me to experience these consoles in like a dream way, like I would have loved to as a kid. Obviously, there's these issues with getting the signal into the TV and how that the TV screws with the signal. But I guess I'm weird because I would prefer to play it if I can get the perfect scenario on a HDTV with screen, because I can then kind of get that arcade, huge, ridiculously expensive cabinet experience almost.
I would never call that weird. And here's where things like, this is just preference, I guess, is the best way to say it.
Yeah. Basically.
The only thing I would call weird is if you said, well, I like the look of the pound cable. I like giving myself headaches and not being able to play a game correctly.
I love a headache.
Yeah, that's weird. Just saying you love the fact that you could play something that you probably as a kid played on like a 13-inch TV.
Yeah.
And now you're on a 65-inch TV, and if you got an OLED and OSSC and you programmed everything in, so it's, you dialed in the frequency just perfect, and it makes a lot of sense, and a lot of people really enjoy that. They love just having this big, huge screen that they could kind of get sucked into, and I completely agree with that to a point. I just my eyes just prefer the look of a beam of light drawing a picture on the back of a glass, and it just it gives you that weird sense of depth that you can't get, at the least in the moment, with flat screens. I think once 4K scalers and 4K scan lines come on, I think that's going to be a little bit different. In fact, I'm hoping that people working on the Raspberry Pi 4 might be able to at least get a demo of that going, so you could see what scan lines in 4K would really look like.
It's funny with it's a bit of a debate about scan lines, because I don't like them, because I get that's what the people that program the games, they knew they were going to have scan lines, so they made the game to look good with them. But for me, when you can take those away, probably mainly talking about an emulator, although you do, if you've got a really good quality like RGB signal on a HDTV, the game can look as good as an emulator, especially if it's a console that has good RGB, like a Mega Drive or something. I can actually now appreciate the pixel art, and I really like the sharp pixels, and I like that I can get a really high level of brightness to the screen. So I'm not a fan of them. I mean, Stu, do you like scan lines when you play like an emulator, or what you get?
I don't ever put them on. I tend not to. I mean, I don't really sort of use too many emulators and the mini consoles. I've got the Super Nintendo one, the SNES one, and
use clean, sort of plain kind of.
If anything, it's terrible. I don't really sort of play around with it too much, but I don't know. Paul, one thing I was sort of planning to sort of ask you is, I've always sort of felt that, maybe going back in time here, when we started to discover this thing called 60 hertz, which obviously you guys have, and I sort of thought that you guys have 60 hertz, but then you never had RGB SCART. So we have RGB SCART, but then everything run at 50 hertz. So a lot of the games sort of ran slower, because they weren't really
no one went back and programmed them to adapt it for the different refresh rate and frequency.
Exactly. And you know, quite often the Mega Drive, or the Genesis you call it, have sort of different borders and things like that over here. They're slower, the music's slower. On Sonic's obviously the obvious one that comes to mind. So do you, I don't know where the question's going really, but do you feel, would you have swapped 56 or 60 hertz for RGB, or?
Not at all, just for one basic reason. If you're on a very good CRT, so you know, any consumer grade TV or a mid grade PVM and below, I mean, if you're 5-6 feet away, it would be hard for you to tell the difference between S video and RGB. We did have S video on the Super Nintendo and on the N64. So you know, it's really only when you get to things that we could not have experienced in the 90s. Realistically, there's no way I was ever going to game on a $5,000 PVM or a $50,000 BVM in the 90s. It was just unfathomable, and that's the only way you'd really get to see a real difference between S video and RGB. There is a difference, but not anything that would take away from the experience. So no, I'm at first I kind of wondered that myself, until I really started digging into testing on CRTs and kind of testing everything back and forth and seeing what it looks like.
I think we definitely got hard done by.
Unless you're an Amiga fan. If you're an Amiga fan in the US, we had a couple of thousand games in the UK that you guys didn't really get at all. And if you tried to play them on your NTSC Amigas, they'll be running weird. Well, actually, some of them wouldn't run because for 50 hertz standard, then you could squeeze in some more code or a few more sprites than maybe you would have if it's running at 60, so they'll just break. So
it's funny. Once I started RetroRGB, I realized how many computers I didn't know even existed.
Right.
You guys out in Europe, my friends in Australia, they all had Commodore 64, Amiga, stuff like that. And we generally in the US primarily had Apple, which wasn't much of a gaming premise. And we also had IBM compatible. And that's where everybody I know, any computer game that you would play would be any kind of PC style game and not something like an Amiga or a Commodore once the 90s hit. In the 80s, we had the mini computers here, but those kind of went out, at least in the Northeast where I grew up.
I mean, the funny thing is that obviously Commodore is an American company. Myself and Trev have talked about it at length, about how in America, the Amiga was branded as a sort of a home computer to do not schoolwork but video processing, music, and all things like that, sort of semi-business work. But then in the UK and Europe, and I think Australia as well, it was branded, this is a games machine, this is the ultimate games machine. And we always sort of laugh at when we see sort of American shows or, the things like the Game Chasers and stuff like that. And there's so huge numbers of like NES games out there in America, shelves full of them, which you'll go into a shop and go, oh, yes. So they've got 3 banks of shelves here full of Super Nintendo games. But if you go to the best retro game shop in London, if they had 50 SNES games, I'll be, oh, wow, that's loads. That's the most I've ever seen. But it was funny at the time. Myself and all my friends at school, we had the Amiga, and you got a lot of the sort of lots of big games on that, and it's just sort of funny how it was sort of a different system. Really, you guys were playing one thing, and we sort of kind of carried on going down the micro route, and to the Amiga 500, the 1200, the Atari ST, another American company.
We kind of had a couple of generations kind of running alongside each other. We had we got the 16-bit home computers, the ST and the Amiga. But we also had at the same time the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum. And the only the first popular console in the UK was the Mega Drive. That really sold in tens of millions. We had the Sega Master System, which was popular. But it was the Mega Drive that killed the Amiga and the Atari ST. We don't really have I guess you guys, like the NES is like the iconic single kind of 80s console. We didn't really have that. If you ask 10 people in the UK what was the thing you played in the 80s, you'll get 10 different answers. Someone will say, I had the Amstrad CPC. Another person will have, I had the Atari ST. Another person will say, I had the Amiga. Whereas probably if you ask 10 people in the US, what was your 80s console? I guess most of them would say NES, and maybe one would say TurboGrafx 16, and the other one would say Sega Master System.
Where in the area I grew up, it would be 90% would say NES.
Yeah.
Excuse me, beer went down the wrong way. And the other 10% would be TurboGrafx, Sega Master System, and maybe a specialty computer or something like that. But in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, Nintendo dominated. And then, of course, the console wars in the 90s were huge in the US. So
Yeah, I mean, we kind of, I think our sort of histories kind of become very similar when we get into the 90s, because we had the Mega Drive and the SNES war. But although in saying that, I think the Mega Drive won here, really. And most of Europe, apart from Germany, I think, the Super Nintendo might have slightly won. But I always argue that the Mega Drive would have won worldwide if it sold more in Japan. Like the Xbox, the Xbox 360 would have completely destroyed the sales of the PS3 if it sold in Japan moderately, because they kind of ended up neck and neck. But that's because the PS3 got good sales in Japan. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Have either of you read the book Console Wars?
Well, no, I really should. They're making a film of it now, aren't they?
Honestly,
I've heard about it.
Read the book just in case they screw up the film. You never know what Hollywood's going to do to things. But it was brilliant, and not only was it fun for gamers, I think anybody who works in any kind of retail, whether it's marketing or coming up with products, it paints so much light on the industry and what happened. And one of my favorite books of the past 10 years, I would say, honestly. But shining light on some of the things that were going on at Sega at the time, you could tell from the beginning of the book why Sega, why Nintendo's still here and Sega really kind of isn't. So, whoever won that 16-bit war or not, at the end of the day, Nintendo won.
Well, we had we did a Dreamcast special with the Dreamcast Junkyard guys. Mm-hmm. And we sort of talked about the announcement when Sega said they were pulling out the hardware business. And I think it actually kind of broke my heart. It sounds like really dramatic, but I was like, well, what am I supposed to who am I supposed to go to now? I'm a Sega dude. Mm-hmm. I don't want to buy a PlayStation 2. I was like, this was what I was going to go with, the Dreamcast. It really broke my heart, and I don't think I've ever really recovered from it, to be honest.
Poor Trev.
Yeah. But one thing I'm curious about, with your perspective on things, Bob, what would you say is the most difficult console to get looking good or getting working well with a HDTV?
Original Sega Genesis.
Really?
So here's the thing. Well, there's two parts to this. First, on a consumer grade TV, I could make different consoles look better, but they're all going to look good. They're all going to look fine. Composite video is going to look like composite. If you're lucky enough to get an RGB TV or a component video in the US with just a converter or the HD RetroVision cables, they're all going to look great. But when you take that picture that's 240 pixels tall and stretch that to over 2,000, every tiny bit of analog noise that's there is going to be amplified as well as everything else. So all of the problems that you get on the Genesis are, which are quite a lot of jail bars and other stuff, are just going to be tremendously visible. And you could say, well, what about the NES, which doesn't have RGB? It's a little bit different, because at least going into this even if you know nothing, with a tiny bit of research, 20 minutes of research, you realize that you have to do some kind of mod to your NES. And no matter what you do, it's going to look great on the flat screen, whether it's the high def NES or a NES RGB. But with Genesis, it's a little bit misleading, because you think you could just plug an RGB cable in, and then what's all this, now there's sharp jail bars. So I think that's the one that's the biggest problem, because you could find a one-chip SNES. You could do a super easy mod on the Mini to bring RGB back to that, and all of those are going to look great. PlayStation, Saturn, they all look phenomenal just by plugging a cable in. And Genesis is the one, especially for the Model 1, which is generally speaking, people's favorite, unless they grew up with the Model 2. So that's the one that's the hardest. Luckily, though, I'm on a team of people who are doing something called the triple bypass. So it bypasses the audio, the video, and the AV connector itself on the Genesis 1. And if you install this properly, you will get everything better. So you'll get as good a video that you could possibly get out of an original console. So, Kevtris's FPGA version is probably going to be better. But, out of an original console, it's as good a signal as you can get. Even purists, if you scale that to 4K, are probably going to say that looks awesome, that's good enough. And the audio, at least on the Model 1, the audio is the same, but there's less ground hum. And then you have the Genesis 2 DIN, so you don't have to worry about adapters and stereo audio and all that crap. So that's been a very it's been a passion project for me, to say the least. It's taken up a lot of time in the past few years. I've gotten to work with some of the smartest freaking people I've ever met, and it's at the moment, the current version of it, there's nothing wrong with it. If you want to tweak it to get it a little better, swap out 2 or 3 resistors or something, but it's certainly excellent the way it is now. But the second version of it, which I think it's ready, I think we're just all about to sign off on it, has those last little tweaks in, and it's going to one board for all consoles. So, which is just more of it's going to make it easier for people to keep stock of. So, the more they're available, the more people will be willing to install it and all that. Because building one of those boards is a giant pain in the ass. Installing it isn't as bad as it looks. So, one of those, if you build it, they will come scenarios. But that's something that's been mandatory for me. So
cool.
I've heard the Mega Drive Mini. There's been a few pre-release units go out there, or the Genesis Mini get out there onto the market. And people are saying, I think I watched the video from the guy from GameSack, Joe. Or was he the one on the left?
Dave was on the left, I think. Yeah.
No, still Joe. Yeah.
Yeah. So he did the video on it and was very sort of positive about it. So I'm sort of like, oh, okay, well that's a good thing, because obviously we know about the AT games, Mega Drives in the past.
Yeah, that's garbage.
They're just awful. Some of the games didn't even work, let alone work and then be poor quality.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on them? Are you looking forward to the Mega Drive Mini?
So, my opinion on all of this stuff, and sorry to repeat myself a little bit, but it always just comes back to, what does this do to the classic gaming experience?
Yeah.
Because it's just too often that people that, hear about retro games, younger people that go back to experience them, or, people who played them as a kid who go back to try them out again, will try them and go, oh, you know what? This game isn't how I remember it, or this isn't as good as people tell me. And they don't realize that their bad experience is because of how they're playing it. So that's all that matters to me. And I think a good example of this is the NES and SNES Classic. Just plug them in, you get 720p. I don't like any of the CRT filters. Just play it as is. And it's a perfectly good experience. It's not an expert level experience, but it doesn't need to be, and it's not supposed to be. Just plug in and play, and it's fine. And if that's good enough for you, great. If you want better, I imagine a lot of people found my site because they bought a SNES Classic and thought, this is really awesome, but how can I make it better? So I think that the Genesis Mini is not going to be quite as good unless they somehow fix the audio delay that was on there. But I think it's at least going to be passable. Whereas the PlayStation Classic is just a piece of garbage. And, every time I say that, hordes of people are always like, oh, but you could hack it. But that's not what these were designed for.
Yeah.
If you really want to hack it, buy a Raspberry Pi and have an amazing experience. If, this is just a plug and play device that you're supposed to just be able to play games on.
Yeah. The PlayStation Mini, I bought one there. Was it Amazon Prime Day or whatever? It was £15 or whatever that is in dollars. I don't know, but it was £15 or $15.99, and I bought that, got it. I had a bit of fun with it, but you're right. It just looked, you couldn't. Some of the text was almost unreadable. It was just so. It was such a sort of a poor product. And I was sort of so disappointed, really, with the whole package. One, with the choice of games. Next, with the quality of the output, and then why on earth they chose to put 50 hertz ROMs on there is just,
it just goes to show you how little they actually cared about that. All it would take is one Q&A person or a QA person to just that actually understands what the PlayStation is supposed to be like, and it would have been fine. The other side of that though is for about $20, now you have a very cool little collector's item mini.
100%. I've got two USB controllers that I can use on my PC.
Exactly.
Little machine, and I had plenty of fun on it. It was, and it was definitely worth the the $15.99 I paid for it. Hands down. $89.99.
Right.
I got that on day one. I've been very disappointed.
The bizarre thing is, we talked about it before, Stu, I think, where all they had to do was put a PlayStation TV, the PS Vita TV, whatever you want to call it, into a PS1 case, which already has a really good PS1 emulator, can connect to the PS Store. They've probably got a whole load of these sat in a warehouse that they were never able to sell. And you've got yourself what would have been a really good PlayStation Classic using a junk that they've already been selling for years. I don't know.
100%, Trev, and then they could have got the whole option of having a marketplace there to carry on selling games for $3.99 and slowly drip feed through like all the Crash Bandicoots, the Gran Turismos.
Like the argument, I get why like people say, the SNES Mini, they should have just made an online store we could go on, but they don't have that infrastructure already somewhere. Like with the Wii, they had the Virtual Console, but then they pared that down for the Wii U, and then there's nothing really now. Well, there's still the Wii U one, but they didn't really have anything like that set up, so they couldn't quickly sort of redo it to work in another device. But PlayStation, Sony were the experts at having old stuff run on newer stuff. Like PS2. Admittedly, that was normally because they shoved a bunch of the old console into the new one. which also they ran into trouble with that with the PS3 because they had to take bits of the PS2 out to sort of make it cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually we lost all the emulation. Well, okay, there's a software emulator, wasn't there, on the PS3 and like the Slim and everything. But yeah, they had a store already. They had a device that's small, the Vita TV, that already played PS1 games. I just thought they should have repurposed that. It was just bizarre that they went down that.
I don't think any of these companies really want to make a perfect solution because they can't sell you the games again. You know, I think it's really going to be up to people like Analog or like anybody working on the Mr. team that wants to spin off, or of course Retro USB, Brian, who made the AVS. I mean, that's a 720p NES that could play all region games, output HDMI, 0 lag added. You know, looks absolutely great. I mean, and that's under $200. So imagine if somebody were to somehow able to, you know, imagine if Hyperkin realized what it was that they're missing out on, and then just made, you know, instead of making them in quantities of 1,000, make them quantities of 10,000 or 20,000. That's now a $100 item, probably.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's going to take third-party people in order to make these original cartridges playable again in the best quality possible, and it's not going to be from the original manufacturers at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like Nintendo are about the best at it at the moment, and obviously there's issues with their devices. Everyone's waiting for an N64 Mini, but I think there's issues with that. One is you need quite a high. You couldn't just use the same like board from the NES Mini and the SNES Mini to really accurately emulate Nintendo.
No chance.
Yeah, and so they have to develop something or something that'll be more expensive. The controller is weird. They might find, like you said, Bob, like kids. Maybe, what are those cool old Nintendo games my dad talks about on the N64 thing, whatever it was? They'll hate playing GoldenEye. They'll pick up this weird controller and it doesn't have 2 sticks, and it'll be really like 20 frames a second at best, and they'll just hate it. And then people that are maybe our age but aren't retro gamers picking it up in a supermarket and then taking it home. Like, God, GoldenEye I never remember it being this bad to play, but it was the same. It was just, you'll get that more with an N64 Mini than you would with the SNES.
Yeah. I actually think if somebody comes up with a really, really good software emulator for the N64, that's probably going to be the best choice. And maybe that could be spun off into a device that does original 240p output, but it's my opinion, and this is just an opinion. A lot of people wholeheartedly disagree with me and hate me for saying this, but I don't like the look of the N64. It was ahead of its time. It was groundbreaking. I loved it for what it was then, but it's, to my eyes, aged about as well as the Atari 2600. However, you will be able to run software emulation that renders those games at a higher resolution. So you'll be able to do a lot of stuff with that'll technically change the look of it. But if you're playing on a flat screen, it would, I think personally, it would probably be a very big improvement. So, I'm looking forward to when the hardware, and maybe the Raspberry Pi 4 is it, who knows, we'll find out soon enough, but something that could render that stuff at a higher resolution would really be a big benefit to people, and you'd be able to make things look however you want it. And that's actually a bunch of cool things that have been going on with emulation, being able to render certain things at higher res and scale it in certain ways. The Super Nintendo progress with the Mode 7 HD and true widescreen support, not stretching. Cool. That's amazing. And stuff like that is just, that's really going to change the way people use emulation, because now there's a reason why you might want that over the original. Yeah, and I think when you get into like the Dreamcast sort of era, like the Xbox and One, the original Xbox, PS2, and Dreamcast, those games haven't really aged graphically much at all. And the emulators for them as well, especially the PS2, like some of those games, they could come out now and they would still look good with the same assets, Yeah, and that was one of the things My Life in Gaming did a phenomenal job when talking about the Symphony of the Night. The PS4 re-release, when they showed that one scene where some of the background 3D graphics were rendered in 4K and the foreground graphics were scaled to still look retro, so you get the best of both worlds. I thought that was absolutely awesome. I really, really enjoyed seeing that, and I'm hoping that there'll be more ports like that where people will be able to maybe you could have a choice, flip a toggle or something, but I really like seeing it like that. And you mentioned the Dreamcast, though. Have you used any Dreamcast that has the DC HDMI installed?
No, I mean I've got a couple of Dreamcasts, and I do plug them into my HDTV to play. But I do need to get some kind of. I know there's terrible pound cables for those as well.
Yeah. So if you want to do a plug and play solution, use any pass through adapter, and then just turn that into HDMI. So I guess I don't know if the pound one does it, but it's good enough. But the difference is when you run the DC HDMI, everything is processed. It sends the image to the screen in a way that's better interpreted. And if you're very lucky, if you're very lucky, your TV will be compatible with the 960p mode. Right. Because what I found was that the 1080p mode, which has just a little border around it, looked very good. Very good on my 4K OLED. But when I ran 960p mode, that means that my OLED then did the final scaling to 4K. And when it did that, you get the super sharp integer scale to 960 and then the really great smooth scale to 4K. And it made it look just like the PS3. So cool. You could do that now in original hardware without even messing around with emulation.
Yeah, you kind of hope that, like we're saying about, maybe the next few years, there'll be a single sort of plug and play cable for every console. And perhaps they'll have some kind of processing in the cable. That will help sort of remove the layer of Vaseline that like the N64 would gets, and
Well, some consoles are always going to require some kind of mod, and Dreamcast is definitely one of them because. Let me try to do this in 2 sentences because it's usually like a 40-minute description for this crap. The way the Dreamcast generates its 480p signal is weird. So you can't just plug a cable in and get a perfect 480p signal. You're going to need to do some kind of manipulation with it. So that's why the internal mod is the only way to get a flawless picture out of the Dreamcast. So, you could, I think the HD RetroVision cables combined with a very good, which are cheap, by the way, but a very good component to HDMI converter, I think that's going to be the best generic plug and play way to get Dreamcast on a flat screen. They take care of a lot of the problems with 480p, a lot of the problems with the switching between the two, and you can get a great pass-through adapter. It doesn't scale, just takes component and makes it HDMI. You can get those in the US for less than $20 that are perfect. So, it's going to be more expensive than these pound cables. You get Dreamcast from, I think they're probably going to be around 65 from HD RetroVision plus another 20. But that's going to be great. That's going to be a really good solution that doesn't hurt the image at all. But if you saw that next to the DC HDMI, you'd be like, all right, now I know the difference. So,
yeah, I've spent some money on cables to try and get the best picture. I think the best example for me is like the original Xbox. I actually bought the original Microsoft component cables.
Oh, cool.
My 4K TV actually weird. It doesn't have SCART, but it has a component connection, and that right, and the picture looks stunning. You have to use. I've got a modded PAL Xbox because that doesn't output component by default. It's really weird. Microsoft locked that out on the PAL.
Very strange.
Yeah. But it's just you could just soft mod it. The hardware's in there. They haven't changed anything with the hardware from the NTSC version. But yeah, I mean, some of the games on the original Xbox in component, and some of them run in native 720p, could easily pass for an early Xbox 360 game. I had to pay about £60 to import the cables because we didn't get them in the UK. But I keep bugging HD RetroVision to make those as well. Just really high quality component cables for the Xbox. They take a long time to do everything because Steve's fastidiousness is like he'll test every aspect of every piece of every cable, and it sucks because it takes forever for them to launch stuff. But it's amazing because every time you get one of their cables, it just doesn't have so many of the problems, and it's both real world performance testable as well as throw that on a scope and you can see the difference immediately between a generic cable and one of theirs. So hopefully they'll get to Xbox soon enough. You can't imagine Pound going into anything like that sort of depth to.
No, it's the opposite. When you go to companies like that, I mean, that's exactly what Eon did, right? They took Dan's design for the Mark II and they sent it to their Chinese supplier and said, pull every ounce of cost out of this. So what you see now is a good, it's a good device, but it's not a $150 GameCube solution. That's probably more like a $99 GameCube solution. And they just made all that extra profit for, I don't know, fancy cars or something, whatever those two do.
Yeah, the GameCube is a funny one as well, because obviously the PAL GameCube got RGB. So we can get there is a high quality, like, Nintendo made RGB SCART cable that I use, which also works with the Super Nintendo. So that's what I use for mine. So I haven't really had a huge need to go and like try and hunt down those legendary like component cables.
Well, the RGB out doesn't do 480p. So if you wanted progressive scan on any of that, that's when you would need to switch over to one of those.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's still not. It won't be. It's not the best image, but that's kind of working for me at the moment. That's another console that. Well, also there's been a sudden flurry, isn't there, of GameCube HDMI sort of solutions that are coming out, and all very, very expensive.
Yeah, that was kind of a weird situation to live through. You know, you have this one guy who, Ingo Korb, Unseen, who designed it. And he said, he respectfully said, it's a lot of work. It's way different to design something that's hard to design than it is to sell and support it. I don't want to be bothered with that. I respect that wholeheartedly. I'd rather have somebody open source something than be a terrible seller. So, all the respect in the world when I say that. And then you had Badass Console step up and say, I'm going to make everything that everybody needs, and I'm going to make it cheap. So people kind of hung back, like, all right, I mean, this guy's timetables are obviously off. He's not going to make it in a month, but, why are we going to build something if he's got it? And then a year goes by, a year and a half goes by, and props to Eon for stepping up to the plate and just doing it. Definitely give him that. And I also understand why the original one costs so much, because it's most people do the opposite. Most people go for the cheaper ones. Oh, sorry, can't really help the sirens in the background. Most people would err on the cheaper side, and then they find themselves in debt, not being able to pay for the next product. So I even understand why it was expensive starting out. But after that, I don't know why more people didn't step up to the plate and start making them. That's why I was really happy when I saw the Carby, because the Carby is everything you could ask for from an HDMI output. It's cheap, but it's identical in quality to any of the other solutions, if not better, because they have such a high quality digital port on that thing. But they didn't make all the marketing money that Eon made, so it's kind of funny. I always, being a nerd, I can't help but get pissed when I see that. But at the same time, I got to respect it, because I wonder how many people Eon brought into the retro gaming scene that would have never been introduced to it if it wasn't for them and their marketing.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting thing on the Nintendo side. I mean, that's the first console to have a digital video output. When the
first Nintendo console, the first console was PC Engine.
Oh, cool. That has a digital video out.
It does, and there's one device right now that takes advantage of it. It's $500, doesn't work right, and the developer is a total asshole. And for the record, I work with a lot of people.
What do you really think? What do you really think?
Yeah.
Don't hold back.
I bent over backwards to make sure that was a fair opinion. I always respect language barriers. I used to work out in Asia a lot. So, whenever I butt heads with somebody, I immediately assume I did something wrong and I'm misunderstanding. So when I say that very rude term, that's a true thing. He doesn't listen at all, doesn't care that we could make it for half the price if he just asked for help. So it's frustrating. I hope somebody else steps up to the plate, because the PC Engine's also one of the noisiest consoles ever. So if you have a direct digital to digital solution, it's no noise. It's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a Super SD System 3, which obviously, has had its issues. But
great now, though.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, it's just most of the best games are CD based, so even more than like the Mega SD. I think it's kind of an essential purchase. It's obviously really expensive, but I kind of made myself broke for a month when I bought it. But it was worth it because I play it all the time. And it's just the interface still needs to be a bit better and a few other weird sort of quirky things, but it's great. But the video, it is really like it can be really noisy, and even though the quality that the SD system you get through a Mega Drive 2 cable is perfect, but I mean that's probably one of the better examples. And
so the thing about that, which this is why YouTube compression drives me absolutely crazy, because I borrowed a Super Graphics. And I tested the output with a bunch of different plug and play solutions, including like I've had a DB graphics booster since I first met Renee, so I always use that as my baseline to make sure something's got perfect output. It all looked like shit. and then I replaced 2 capacitors on the bottom of the Super Graphics. I mean, we're talking beginner level work here. 2 capacitors, 5 minutes worth of work, and it's perfect. So it's one of those weird things where you don't need, well, I mean, you know, unless your caps are leaking like on the Duo systems, like on a Super Graphics, you don't need to do a full recap on it. You just need to replace 2 of them, and then the signal's perfect. But without doing those, it looks garbage no matter what you do. And that's kind of why having a true digital solution would be great, because if you have a console that doesn't need a recap, just don't do one and you get a perfect signal. So.
Yeah, so I've got one of the Turbo Graphics, but I think it's a slightly different color. It came out later in PAL regions, like a grey one. Your one's black, right? Mm-hmm. So I've got the grey one, and that one's got an extra port on the side.
Garbage.
For garbage. AV out.
It's garbage. It's basically you can't mod them to 60 hertz. So all the games that you'll play, it's compatible with all the US games, but they'll all run 17% slower. Which so. But they had they have composite out built in. Mm-hmm. So that extra port on the side, it allows you to connect which I guess you've done, Stu, if you've plugged it into a TV.
Yeah, I mean it came with the AV cable to plug in. I haven't used it for a good while, but
you get a good video signal from it, and you don't have to have an extra. You don't need the turbo booster like you had to have for the American Turbo Graphics.
Yeah.
Just to get composite video. It was just RF only, wasn't it, Bob? The original TurboGrafx,
original TurboGrafx and original Core Graphics were RF only, and then the Core Graphics 2, I think there were 3 colors of the Japanese one. So the original one was RF out, and the other 2 had the AD out, and you could replace that port with and do an internal RGB mod. Or to be honest, I mean, at this point, I would recap one of those just for safety reasons. You know, make sure you don't have capacitors leak and eat out the traces on the motherboard. But I would use external solutions from all of those. And if you use like the briefcase, you know, where you snap the Core Graphics and the CD-ROM drive, I would do the RGB mod to that over any of those. But I really like those mini, you know, those tiny little Core Graphics systems. I think those are really great. I think that you get a lot for those.
Yeah, my primary PC Engine is just the original white unit with the Super SD connected to it, because obviously now you can get the RGB out the back with that. And
did you do the jail bar fix on that one?
I don't know if it was already done. They didn't do them already done, did they? Well, I think it was the capacitor that was the wrong way around.
No, on the Core Graphics itself. Did you pop it open and replace the 2 capacitors?
No, it needs to be done.
You'd be surprised at how huge of a difference that makes.
And it gets rid of the jail bars completely. Yeah. You get a really clean image. Yeah, unfortunately I'm not that way inclined in terms of electronics and everything, so I'd have to sort of get someone to do it for me. There is some really good guys in the UK. There's a guy called Old School Consoles. He did my NES. He modded it for RGB.
There's one guy who I'm trying to remember, because there's, you know, don't forget, you know, when you talk about retro gaming, there's 10 different people with retro in their name. There's 15 companies with old school in their name spelled different ways. But I had to sell off a bunch of stuff a while back, and I sold a Duo to somebody in the UK, and it showed up broken. So, you know, the guy was very cool. We got the insurance money. Everything was fine, and he needed it repaired. And somebody, it might have been that person, but somebody basically said, I won't do it unless you put my links to my site on your website.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I wasn't asking for free work, by the way. I said, hey, whoever the email was, I said, hey, I heard you do great work. Can I please pay you to do this? I know it's not what you normally do, but, you know, I really need a favor here because, you know, this poor person bought this console that got smashed in shipping. And he came back and was like, well, I mean, I might be able to, but are you going to put links on your website to my store? No, you could go fuck yourself. Now not only am I not going to, I'm going to tell everybody
do you know
what you did.
What happened? If he did that for you and did a really good job and helped you out, what would you have done? Anyway. You would have put links.
Right. I would be
and told everyone about it.
I like talking about the happy stories. That would have been a thing. That would have been a name that was dropped multiple times, you know, because look who, and you know, it was funny. Ash Evans, I emailed him and told him what happened. And he was like, fuck that guy. Send it to me. I'll do it for $20. And he did. So, I absolutely couldn't believe And I don't know if it was old school consoles, because there's two companies, one in Sweden and one in the UK with a very similar name, and the one in Sweden's awesome. So I can't remember which one it was. So please don't pin me down for which company. But I was so turned off by that. What a piece of shit move.
That is a bit. Hopefully, it isn't the same one that we're talking about. And it was good with me. I mean, obviously. I sent him my NES, and I even emailed him and said, "Oh, can you do the mod so I can get the extra sound channels on the Japanese games?" He's like, "Yeah, I'll throw that in for free." So he was good to me, and even put like an in-game reset function onto the NES, which is really cool. Although now I found out the new EverDrive that's coming out for the NES is going to have an in-game menu, negating the need for an in-game reset. But hey, it's in there, so it's cool.
As long as the work was done properly, anything can be removed and undone without any damage, unless you cut the plastic. That's the only thing that obviously can't be undone. But I mean, you're going to need an output in that anyway, so whatever. But that's another thing I really like about a lot of the mods that I talk about is most of the stuff that I talk about is fully reversible, including things like the Game Boy Advance Consolizer. If someday if holography comes out and we no longer have TVs, we have boxes with 3D things, and you wanted to put that back in a Game Boy Advance case, you totally could. Like, there's a lot of the stuff out there, you probably wouldn't, but you could reverse if you needed to. And that's something that, like, those cheap RGB amps that I used to sell way back in the day, those are great. There's nothing wrong with those, but there's a few newer ones now that, like on N64, if you have an older one, maybe all you wanted was RGB, and that's fine. But now you could get the new kit with the de-blur option and all that other stuff. Yeah. So you don't ruin your console by doing that. You just hit it with a heat gun. The old one falls off. You put the new thing in, and beautiful. The mod that's now outdated doesn't hurt your console. So
when we get to like Star Trek: The Next Generation time, and we can go in the holodeck, you'll still be able to like demod your console and plug it into the holodeck, and well, that'd be crazy. What you better do with that, but yeah, that'll be amazing. So just going on a slightly different sort of subject. I mean, obviously, we know that you sort of help. You know about modding consoles to work on TVs and recapping them if they're ones that are notorious for that kind of thing, like PC engines, like we just said. But outside of that, do you collect? Do you have a collection, like a retro game collection?
So I live in an apartment in Manhattan. So if I buy a new game, I have to sell another game in order to physically fit it on the shelf. Right. So the only things, like, I always buy my favorite games. So I always have the ones that, like the Zeldas, the Metroids and stuff. And I always try to get the weird things. Like, I have multiple consoles, mostly for testing reasons. I have all the 32X CD games just because it's weird. Oh, wow. And, there's no other way. I mean, when I say all of them, there's like 5. But, certain 3D Master System games, I really enjoyed those. Yeah. Outrun 3D is one. Obviously I have a ROM cart. I could easily just play the ROM, but I wanted the original. My buddy Kenji got me that from Brazil, so that was like extra cool. I have a Brazil edition in
the US. Outrun 3D.
We didn't know you got it in the UK, and I don't even know if Japan got it. I think it was Brazil and UK.
Yeah, quite strange. So you kind of have a small collection that space allows, kind of thing.
Yeah, to be honest, if I had the space, I would collect CRTs without a doubt. I would have just a garage filled with them, different types, different styles, and I would use them all. To be honest with you, I would, because certain games look better with certain types of tube. Like, while that might sound insane, but like if you grew up with a Sony TV, and you grew up with like a Mega Drive, every time you play Sonic, you're going to want to see it on an Aperture Grill tube. But if you grew up going to the arcade and playing Neo Geo, you'd want to see that on a Shadow Mask tube. So you'd want a non-Sony. So I would love to collect CRTs if I had the room for it. Definitely.
Do you go to Video Games New York?
Yeah, I know. I got to know Dan. It's funny. I always admit when I'm wrong, and that was one of the situations where I was dead wrong. I walked in there a couple times and was like, "These people are crooks. Why are they why are they charging so much money for certain things?" And I completely didn't get it. If you walk in there, modern games are the same price, if not cheaper, than everywhere else. You could buy stuff super cheap. mainstream consoles, SNES and Genesis are, they're a premium price, but they're not unfair. It was the things that caught my eyes when I first walked in were like their little museum area, where it's like $20,000 for a dev unit PlayStation or $200 for an Atari. And it took me a while to realize like they're not trying to sell those. That's their just stuff that they want to display. That's why, if someone's dumb enough to spend $20,000 on it, fine. But, so I completely misunderstood what they were doing there. And I also had no idea how much behind the scenes work that they do in the retro gaming world.
They do. I went to New York a few years ago, and part of my, I've got to go to that shop. So I went there, and I think I bought 7 or 8 games and had a good look around. Spent an hour or something, and I was chatting to the guy. I can't remember his name, but he was very helpful. But then, of course, I follow them on Facebook, and they do amazing work with actually getting in lots of limited run games and sort of games that the Josh Prod ones for the Dreamcast and things like that, and actually stocking them in a shop. So I imagine that I'd be sort of very tempted if I lived in Manhattan, which obviously I don't, to pop it in there to go, oh wow, you've got this, really sort of unusual games, and they did. It looked like to me they didn't stock things like, or they probably did, but things like the Call of Duties, Maddens or FIFA for us, things like that. They'll get them in because they'll sell a few, but then they'll actually get in some of the more unusual Japanese games for the PS4 and more unusual sort of RPGs, and go, actually, we're going to go heavy on the stock of these because that's what our sort of niche customers want. And lots of people come into Manhattan, especially to visit us. They buy them, and then of course they sell them all online as well, I imagine.
I'm not sure how much online stuff they do, but it's it's just a matter of understanding the store that you're going to. There's J&L, which is kind of closer to the Nintendo store in Manhattan, and if you go in there and you see some of the retro stuff, and it's like, why would I spend $350 on a Japanese N64? I could order it from Yahoo Japan delivered for $100. Like, I don't. What's the point? But once again, I mean, if you're in that area, you're in. I'm sure their rent is something ungodly. And, they have to jack the price up on something. So you just got to understand what you're looking for, and then you get the opposite. You go to a place like Brooklyn Video Games where, these are all small stores. It's New York. It's got to be small, but they have a full RGB setup, 2 streaming arcade rigs. Like, it's just, you walk into that place and you're like, oh shit, that's what these people are about, huh? All right. You can buy RGB cables right off the shelf. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So one thing I've been curious about, Bob, with obviously, you do play the retro games. So when you come home from like your full-time job, whatever it is, and you want to just sit down and play an old game, what is your setup that you use for that? Do you have do you use an emulator? Do you use like RetroArch, or do you actually have every console set up somewhere and you could just turn it on and sit down and play? What's your setup for that?
So I rarely get the chance to actually play games anymore. Right. And when I test whatever is relevant to how and where I'm testing. So if I already have a TV on, I'll just plug it into the flat screen and test for that. But if I'm actually going to sit down and play a game and really just sink into it and enjoy it, I have a few monitors on wheel carts. I of course have the BVM D32, and so what I'll plug a console in directly, reel the monitor over in front of me, and then plug it into my stereo. And do it that way. So it's always, if I'm really playing, and for no other purpose than to play, not testing, not working out something out, it's going to be on whatever I think the CRT is best for that might be. Sometimes, like if it's a light gun or a Sega 3D game, I'll just get the biggest CRT I have. Right now I have a 32-inch consumer grade that my friend Jose and I recapped, and we're about to RGB mod. Like, that is ultimate Sega 3D monitor right there. Really high quality, but it's big, and but mostly I'll pull out like a BVM of sorts and just sit back and game on that while playing the audio through the stereo.
Cool. So what are your thoughts on, the only sort of large retro TVs that I can think of tonight is our rear projection TVs.
Oh, no.
Are they terrible for gaming? That's what I kind of think they probably would be.
You mean a rear projection TV?
Yeah, the big, in the 90s, you'd get a 40 or 50-inch TV, normally for, Laserdisc players and home cinema. But obviously you could plug consoles into them and they'd just be 480, you know, I or 480p. Are they things that could be used for retro games? I mean, they'd be impossible to ship to anybody. You'd have to sort of go and collect one. But yeah, what are your thoughts on those? I've
actually never tested one for gaming. It's kind of funny that, you know, you would think that I would be all over that because they're nice and big, but I've never liked them. Even when they were, I remember seeing, it was like a $12,000 70-inch Sony rear projection that was supposed to be like the best thing ever. And, you know, I think plasmas became mainstream the year after that. But, you know, and I saw it. And then I used to work for a company where I would end up going to a lot of these home automation expos and stuff. So super high audio and video stuff. I saw that one. And the next demo that I walked into was like a $6,000 projector. And it just destroyed it in every way. So half the price. So I've never messed with those. I think I had an aunt with like a Mitsubishi rear projection TV that we tried to play the Wii on, and it looked like garbage. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a hidden gem rear projection TV out there. I don't know. I would have to first test the lag.
I remember a good few years ago, I went to a friend's house, and there's 4 of us playing on a rear projection TV on an N64. I imagine I had an AV cable obviously going into the back, and I remember it just looked so washed out, and this was when it was a brand new console, and it just looked absolutely awful, to the point where I was, I'm not really enjoying playing this. It was, you know, it looks better on my 14-inch TV I've got at home, or 20-inch, whatever it was. And I've always, I don't think they're great for gaming.
Yeah. What I am very interested to try out is high quality CRT projectors. So those are the ones that have the 3 color bulbs in front. And remember, you know, back in the day when you had the highest end one of these, we're talking 10, 15, 20 grand for one. I picked one of those up that was, you know, it was at least 10 grand. And I think I got it for $50 or something. They're really heavy, by the way, for anybody listening. They're over 100 pounds. I did not expect that. But I ended up, you know, I gave it to a buddy of mine, John, because I don't have the room for that. But I would love to see what a calibrated, tuned one of those looks like. Because I've had, you know, my buddy Chris, one of the writers for RetroRGB, has one, and he loves it. I've had people tell me that they had, you know, a decent condition BVM, that they prefer their really high quality CRT projector to that, both not just for the size, but the look and everything. So that's the thing that I would love to spend some time. But as with everything else, of course, it's not like a new projector. You have to calibrate them, set them up, make sure everything's configured properly, or it just won't look right. So
that's potentially a solution to an old school, you know, television that could be a large screen. So that's interesting. So obviously we're going over an hour now. It's been a really awesome chat. But I do have one last question for you, Bob.
Sure.
So what would you say is your favorite console, and why?
You know, I always say Super Nintendo. It's always so close between SNES and Genesis for me. But at the end of the day, if I had to pick 2 games that you know, my 2 favorite games of all time are A Link to the Past and Super Metroid. So as a result, it goes back to Super Nintendo being my favorite.
Yeah. Cool. So there you go. We've revealed. Actually, you probably said that loads of times on your channel that the SNES is your favorite, but you've put it on here as well. Cool. So, Bob, thank you so much for coming onto the show today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. And where can we find you on the internet? Are you just YouTube? Do you have a website? Where can everybody find you?
Well, RetroRGB.com is always the place to go. You know, I never consider myself a YouTuber. I run a website that also makes videos that's available on YouTube, BitChute, Library. I don't really care where the videos are. I mean that respectfully. You know, I just so always link back to the website for anything. You know, it's got all the guides on there. News articles are up. It's mostly daily these days for keeping people in the loop of everything going on in the retro gaming scene. And then, of course, you know, I have the weekly podcast. If anybody wants to, you know, if you prefer listening over reading, maybe it's just easy in your commute, then it's basically all the articles in a podcast form, you know, mixed with my opinions, which very often are not appreciated. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And, you know, you can find me everywhere at RetroRGB. And if you like what we do, please consider signing up for any of the support platforms. Bitbacker, Subscribestar, Patreon, because that's the only thing keeping us going at the moment is all the amazing support from the people that understand what it is we're trying to do.
Yeah, so please check out Bob's website, RetroRGB. Please support him on his various channels that he grab some support from you guys. The work that he does is really important. People like us, retro gamers, want to keep those consoles running for as long as we can and have them displayable on whatever new TVs come out in the future. Bob is super important for that sort of work. And Stu, where can you find us?
Right, you can find us on iTunes, search Console Shock, and I've now messed around with the websites, so we don't just show the last 10 episodes like a bunch of noobs. We actually show all of the episodes now. Well, from episode 10, I think the first 9 are only ever on YouTube, so we might. Well, I don't will ever put those on there.
Terrible in those ones. You don't listen to those ones.
You don't want them. They weren't very good. So we're on iTunes. We're actually. I always mention Stitcher, but I actually realised we're on Google Podcasts as well. So I don't know if I did that or they've picked us up. I'm not quite sure, but we're actually on Google Podcasts as well. So search Console Shock on there. Again, our YouTube channel, Console Shock, search that. And our website, consoleshock.net, and the Facebook page and Twitter. So wherever you search Console Shock, you'll find us.
Great. Well, thanks for listening. This has been episode 57, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thanks for having me.
See ya.
Bye.